Thank you. We're really delighted to have you here to the first session of the 2021 Global People's Assembly. My name is Sarah Franklin, and I'll be the facilitator for this European Assembly. So in parallel to the UN General Assembly, over the next 3 days, people from the 7 continents and 80 countries will gather together as part of the Global People's Assembly. They represent a diverse and powerful global network of national coalitions, constituency groups, and initiatives for advocacy and mobilization at the regional and the global levels. The Global People's Assembly brings together the voices of the most marginalized and vulnerable groups in order to influence international processes and institutions to inspire them to create massive change. And this is an opportunity to collaborate in solidarity around the key issues that the world is facing. This session is aptly titled Leave No One Behind, which is the overarching principle of the UN 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. And although the aspiration and promise of the SDGs and targets offered some hope of a global strategy to address these challenges in a more holistic fashion, the implementation and the upholding of the member states' commitments to the SDGs has fallen far short. Consequently, the message from global organizations around the world is that we're not on track for the SDGs. So from a European perspective, in this current political cycle, Ursula von der Leyen made it very clear in her mandate that the SDGs were the responsibility of each and every EU commissioner. But with the introduction of the European Green Deal, it seems that the SDGs are now in danger of being sidelined. Through a series of concerted advocacy actions, ranging from meetings with commissioners, reports and roundtable sessions and statements, SDG Watch Europe and its members have been actively campaigning to highlight our concerns and offer our support in delivering on our collective commitments to the SDGs to keep up the momentum and promote progress. So SDG Watch has been calling upon the Commission to provide a comprehensive strategy for a sustainable Europe 2030 with an implementation plan for the SDGs, which includes milestones and binding targets, measurable indicators, transparent and collaborative reporting, and adequate finance. We call for the European Green Deal and the SDGs to be aligned in order to highlight the interconnectedness and intrinsic nature of these two development frameworks. And we want to see that the SDGs are placed at the heart of the European semester cycle with 5 to 10 headline indicators that address the main sustainability challenges and establish an annual and multi-annual SDGs monitoring and reporting cycle as a meaningful European semester cycle. In terms of civil society, we've repeatedly urged the Commission to provide an implementation plan for the SDGs and a roadmap for policy coherence for sustainable development, and a structured dialogue mechanism for stakeholder and civil society participation in the design and implementation of the SDGs. We've been strongly urging the Commission to establish a permanent, inclusive, and truly participatory civil society and multi-stakeholder platform with a clear mandate until 2030, which will increase civil society and local authorities' engagement on the SDGs. Regrettably, we have yet to see substantive action on or commitment to any of these issues. So what progress is actually being made? Our first speaker is Jens Martens, the Director of Global Policy Forum Europe, of which Jens has been the director since its foundation in 2004. Since 2011, Jens has coordinated the International Reflection Group on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And since 2016, he has been the editor of the Global Civil Society report, Spotlight on Sustainable Development. He's going to present the Global Spotlight Report 2021, Demanding Justice Beyond Rhetoric, which was launched very recently on September the 17th. So Jens, you're very welcome to the Global People's Assembly. It's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me and for being here in this important assembly. Some of you probably witnessed the SDG moment yesterday. Among the speakers were many heads of state and government, like the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and celebrities like Melinda French Gates, who who was, by the way, invited to speak on gender equality. The event was linked to the so-called Uniting Business Live event, which brought together many business leaders from around the world with UN officials, but civil society, in our view, played only a marginal role in this SDG moment. We think civil society must play a crucial role in implementing and particularly in monitoring and review the SDGs to hold governments accountable for their action or better inaction. That's why we decided 6 years ago to produce an annual Spotlight report. We call it Spotlight Report to demonstrate that we don't want to stay in the shadow of governmental policies and reporting, but want to put our analysis and policy recommendations in the spotlight. And I'm very glad to see that the number of independent Spotlight reports from national and regional coalitions is growing year by year, including the European Spotlight report we published 2 years ago. But monitoring and review should not be reduced to the implementation of the SDGs. Rather, I think it should include spillover effects, contradictions, structural obstacles in the actors, and particularly the vested interests behind them. And this is what we are doing in this year's Spotlight report again. We describe how policy responses to the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting economic crisis have exacerbated rather than reduced national and global inequalities. Just to give you an example, the net wealth of billionaires has risen to record levels since the outbreak of the pandemic. It increased by more than $5 trillion to 13 trillion within 1 year. There are more than 40 new billionaires who draw their fortunes from companies involved in fighting COVID-19. They are among the main profiteers of the pandemic. On the other hand, as everybody knows, the number of people living in extreme poverty has also increased massively by at least 100 million only in 2020 to 732 million. This contrast alone shows that something is fundamentally wrong in the world. In response to the disastrous effects of the pandemic, there was much talk of solidarity, including by the EU President of the European Commission and many others, with regard to health support, including access to vaccines. But the brutal national competition for vaccine shows that solidarity is embraced by many world leaders merely as a rhetorical flourish. Last year, the WHO made an early appeal to countries to agree on a coordinated and fair distribution of vaccines. This has not happened at all. By now, more than 60% of people in high-income countries has been vaccinated, but less than 2% have done so in low-income countries. The European Commission, the US, the UK, and other countries have signed bilateral COVID-19 vaccine agreements with pharma companies to secure their own vaccine quotas. More than 400 agreements were concluded, securing 18 billion doses of vaccine for their own population. The European Commission has so far negotiated supply agreements for 4.3 billion doses of vaccine, equivalent to 8 vaccine doses per capita of the EU population. The UK could vaccinate its population 9 times, the US 10 times, and Canada as many as 16 times. Exacerbating the problem for many countries in the global south is the enormous cost of vaccines. Sometimes vaccine producers even grant preferential treatment to rich countries, while countries in the global south have to pay higher prices. Just for example, the European Commission received a batch of AstraZeneca vaccine for $2.19, while Argentina had to pay $4 and the Philippines have to pay $5. Botswana, another example, had to pay $28 per dose Moderna vaccine, while the US got it at almost half the price for $15. So while Big Pharma makes enormous profits, countries of the global south are confronted with falling governmental revenues and rising debt burdens. And the situation will worsen as regular vaccine boosters become necessary in the coming years. In view of this dramatic disparity, the promise to leave no one behind of the 2030 agenda remains an empty slogan in our view. So what to do? As an immediate response to the global health crisis, the People's Vaccine Alliance has formulated 5 steps to end vaccine apartheid. And we will hear about this probably later again. These are fully in line with the demands of our Spotlight report. Increasing global vaccine production capacity, lowering market prices, and substantially increased public financial support are vital, especially for the poor and disadvantaged people in the global south. Just to give a few examples, the WHO established the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool last year to accelerate technology transfer. But unfortunately, all big vaccine producing countries like the US, like Germany, but also like China and India do not support this initiative. So it has so far remained without any noticeable impact. But this initiative would be extremely important and should be supported, as well as the TRIPS waiver, the waiver under the TRIPS agreement of the WTO to temporarily remove patent protection for COVID-19 related vaccines, medicine and devices. Still, the European Union, the UK, Switzerland, and a few other countries are particularly opposed and have so far blocked any agreement. The third example is the so-called COVAX initiative. Of course, the countries of the global south need more financial resources to buy vaccines. And therefore, the WHO with partners, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, created the COVAX initiative, which in our view is the wrong way to go, because we think the WHO should be the right place to deal with these issues and not a new multi-stakeholder initiative with own governance and decision-making structures outside the UN system, thereby weakening WHO's role in the global health architecture further. But now we have it, and we see that it's underfunded and it is not able to really implement even its function to support the 92 poorest countries in the world with sufficient vaccines. So far, COVAX received around $9.8 billion and promised or planned to distribute 2 billion doses of vaccine by the end of the year. But so far, only 270 million, or a little bit more maybe today, were distributed and allocated to countries in the global south. So that's absolutely insufficient. And also for this reason, for the dysfunctioning of the global health system, or the not existing global health system, people, including Michel from the European Union, proposed to create a pandemic treaty, a legally binding framework to improve the global governance structure for pandemic preparedness and responses. But again, we think that is not the right way to go, probably because we already have an institution, we already have the legal framework within the WHO. And I think we think we don't need necessarily a new long-term process of negotiating a treaty, but we think it's more important to really strengthen and support the existing framework and the existing institutions. But beyond this, beyond the global health crisis, in our Spotlight report, we say that far more fundamental transformational steps are needed. And I can only highlight in the last 2 or 3 minutes I have the key issues. And I mean, that's nothing new in a way. It's all well known, but it's not implemented yet. So we say we really have to shift towards a rights-based economy. Our friends from the Center for Economic and Social Rights are pushing for this, have been pushing for this for many years, to say we need a rights-based economy and the concept of human rights that forms the basis of our vision of economic justice. To make the systemic shift happen, the trend towards privatization, outsourcing, and systemic dismantling of public services must be reversed. And that's, of course, especially true for the health sector, but not only for the health sector. The situation is similar in the education sector. Colleagues from Education International described in our report that the situation continued to deteriorate as a result of the pandemic, and the global teacher shortage, which the UN estimated at 69 billion even before the pandemic, will continue to grow so long as teaching remains, as they say, an overworked, undervalued, and underpaid profession. A basic precondition for the adequate provision of public goods and services, of course, is the sufficient provision of resources. And Isabel Ortiz Many of you know her, warns in our Spotlight report that more than 100 countries could face new austerity measures in the coming years. To prevent the COVID-19 pandemic being followed by a global debt and austerity pandemic, governments must be enabled to expand fiscal space and to implement alternatives to neoliberal austerity policies. And there are many options. I cannot describe them now in the last minute, but they include progressive tax reforms, they include really eco-social fiscal reforms, and they include, of course, an increase in additional external funding. And just to give you a final example, in this regard, the general allocation of special drawing rights, equivalent to $650 billion, the largest distribution ever made by the IMF, could be seen as a major achievement in this regard. But the problem is that its distribution will not benefit the countries most in need without rechanneling measures, and again illustrates the existing imbalance in the global economic architecture. Only 3% of the 650 billion will go to the low-income countries if there's not a real decision to rechannel this and to give really the money countries like Germany really don't need as a liquidity, give this money to those in need, particularly to the low-income countries and the countries in Africa. To conclude, only if the world collectively embarks on the path towards transformational policies is there a chance to really reduce these national and global inequalities, protect our shared planet, and make the proclaimed goal of solidarity a political and institutional reality. And I'm glad to see that many in the Global People's Assembly are very like-minded with what we are saying in our Spotlight report. And I would like to invite all of you to take another look into the report and to share our joint messages and demands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that sobering report, Jens. And certainly the COVID-19 is a very strong theme of the Global People's Assembly. I'd like to move on now to the next part of our program, which is entitled Leave No One Behind. And speaker Sylvia Beales is the co-author of GCAP's Faces of Migration EU report on SDGs and migration in the EU. It's provisionally titled The Future Must Be One of Inclusion, Monitoring SDGs in EU Migration and Asylum Policy. And Sylvia will tell us about the report in a moment. Sylvia is the director of Beales Gelbert Consult, Inclusive Social Development Consultancy. She's a strategic advisor to the Grey Panthers and the Africa Platform for Social Protection. She's a representative of the UNICE Regional Coordination Mechanism on behalf of older persons and founder of the Stakeholder Group on Aging. And Sylvia works with and advises the Global Call for Action Against Poverty and Action for Sustainable Development on Aging, Disability, Inequality, and the SDGs. Sylvia, we're absolutely delighted to welcome you to the Global People's Assembly. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I am really delighted to be here and follow Jens on the Spotlight report, which plays a really important role in putting out, as he said, the things that people don't really talk about, making the real difference. So thank you very much. I'm honoured too to be the co-author of this report. It's not quite done. So what I'm going to share with you today are key findings. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen, which worked before, but if it doesn't, please, could Rose or Sarah do it for me? Thank you. I've got a little PowerPoint. So where's the PowerPoint? I can't see it. Could you put it up for me, Rose, or I'll, I do beg your pardon. I'll just have a quick look for it. The issue, well, all right, I've got it. So now I'm going to attempt to put it up. And I go back into the Zoom. Where is the Zoom? Sarah, could you do it for me? Got a bit stuck with the
access. Sorry. Oh, there we go.
Right.
Great.
You've got it up. I can't see.
Coming up.
Right, got it. Okay. Well, anyway, very much for having to talk about this. The issuance and asylum policy is very well, so it's both controversial and shines a light on the issue of leave no one behind, in the sense that migrants tend to be the whipping post, you know, when domestic policy is problematic. Migrants are blamed for taking jobs, they're blamed for taking attention away from domestic problems. And so for a key point really, as I go through the nation, is that the migrants and asylum seekers and refugees which are present in Europe, in many countries of Europe, and are facing absolutely despicable conditions in detention centres or reception centres, or on border walks, are the most left behind of all, because they're not in our minds except as a problem, rather than one of integration and inclusion and acceptance. And of course, the Afghanistan question has brought all this to the fore. So I'm going to just, and of course, it's a human rights question fundamentally, as Jens said. So I want that a key sort of thought as we go through the presentation. So how do I get to it again? Please, can you share, I'm really sorry about this, but I don't seem to be able to, okay. So I want to give a few of a reality. I mean, we may think that all asylum seekers come from Northern Africa, or migrants, all migrants are asylum seekers, they come from Northern Africa, etc. But the reality is not that. So I've got a few points on the top of this slide, which is that the minority of migrants and asylum seekers, we all in our European economies depend on migrants for work. Ukrainians top the list of migrants, followed by Morocco and India. In Italy, migrants contribute at least 10% of the national GDP. The Eurozone is responsible for 12% of remittances to low and middle income countries. And of the 23 million of non-EU citizens, they are 5% of the EU total population. So we don't have a situation where migrants crowd our shores. But we do have a situation where it's, previous slide, please. It's previous slide, Rose, or whoever doing it. Okay, so thank you. So as you can see from the slide, those seeking asylum are 9%. Most migrants, refugees and asylum seekers are coming for family, and many come for work. So I think it's important that we keep these reality issues in our mind when we look at the migration question. So can I have the next slide? please. Thank you. So this is a picture I found on the internet, which actually describes what's happening today. I'm sitting in Greece, in Naxos, and not so far away is the island of Lesbos and another island of Kos, where people such as these in the boat, fellow citizens of the world, children, older people, women, young men, are fleeing persecution, conflict, and they land up in these boats and they die. And the UNHCR has estimated, it's probably, you know, an underestimate, between January and July this year, 1,044 were missing at sea. It's a global disgrace. We are failing in our duty to support people in search of safety, which is a duty we are all bound to because of our because of the Geneva Convention of 1951 and its protocol of 1967, which stipulate a person should be returned to a country and left unsupported, left unprotected. It's a principle of non-refoulement, which I'll come to later. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is really just a sort of example of the global obligations and national responses. This is I've put up there a quote from Amina Mohammed in 2018, when the Global Compact for Refugees was agreed, which is a non-binding agreement. But I think it encapsulates what we need to think about. We all have responsibilities towards refugees to find solutions that respect their human rights, to provide them with hope, and to recognize the legal responsibility we all bear to protect and support them. And the other important point for this assembly is that this is critical for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, because otherwise they are left behind. We are failing if we don't do this. And the second quote is from the Czech Republic Prime Minister, who said, "Why should we take them in? We have orphans here that we need to help in order for them to have a better life. We will not accept a single refugee." And the third point here, according to the UN report of 2021, despite the migrant deaths each year, not all countries have comprehensive policies on migration. And this is a core theme for the EU, to find comprehensive policies on migration, which all countries will respect. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so what are the EU missions and policy standards? Well, some of them I put up a selection. Obviously, we have the 51 Refugee Convention and the 1967 Protocol. We have the EU Charter, which stipulates that member states must guarantee the right to asylum. We have the EU Lisbon Treaty, with the obligation to offer appropriate status to any third country national requiring international protection. We have the Global Compact of Refugees and the Global Migration, both of which stress responsibilities for principles and standards of protection and solidarity and inclusion. So you've got here, we listed the member states that voted against. So you can see them here: Australia, Bulgaria, Italy, Latvia, Slovakia, Romania abstained, Czech Republic, Hungary and Poland against the Compact on Refugees. And on the migration, which stresses solidarity and inclusion, Hungary voted against and Poland didn't vote. But we also have the SDGs, and issues of migrants and asylum seekers and refugees should be integrated into every SDG. But there's a particular goal, goal 10, with a specific requirement, which is that member states must facilitate orderly, safe, regular and responsible migration and mobility of people. So we have to consider whether we are doing this or we are not, and the reasons for not doing it. Next slide, please. So in Europe, and we have the, we have the MEPs and experts here who will, I'm sure, comment on this, but we have the Dublin regulation, which means that when you arrive in a country which is not your own, you apply for asylum there. But we've also got the EU-Turkey agreement, which is from 2016, which provides for asylum seekers crossing from Turkey to Greece that they are returned to Turkey. And this has resulted in screening processing places on the Greek islands called reception integration centres or hotspots. Go into that in a bit. The new pact stresses solidarity between member states. The new pact on migration and asylum, but it doesn't extend to equitable sharing of refugees between member states. So solidarity can be discharged by sponsoring returns or contributing to the cost of reception centres. So it's a bit of a muddle, the new pact. It's a retreat from solidarity, not an advance. It's supposed to streamline procedures, but also for deportation, repatriation. It strengthens the ability of other countries to prevent would-be migrants from coming to Europe. It strengthens and supports member states' capacity to monitor and police immigration, leading to these these terminology like Fortress Europe and the creation of Frontex. And it uses external assistance as an incentive to countries of origin to reduce migration flows. And just to say on the streamlining, if you have people who don't have the language, who don't know, they become very stressed, they have a lot of psychological issues, it takes quite a long time to streamline. And it's a big issue. Next slide, please. Okay, so a word about Frontex. So Frontex is a new European Border and Coast Guard agency. And in the EU sort of multi-year program, it will have a standing core, supposedly, of 10,000 border guards and a budget of 11 billion euros within the multi-annual budget going to 2027. But it has a number of incompatible tasks. It wants to deter illegal migration, but also safeguard their human rights. It wants to rescue people in danger at sea and assist member states in securing their borders through, for example, border walls, border fences, and it wants to combat migrant smuggling. So the number of many reports are written, but Human Rights has said in a recent report that it's been complicit or has done nothing to prevent violence, illegal pushbacks and denial of access to asylum by countries which include Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, Greece, Hungary and Malta. And indeed, the responsibility for what you might call illegal pushbacks and denial of rights is with the member states. So the conclusion here is that the member states must be very vigilant about their human rights obligations to not fall foul of their duties to refoulement without proper due process. Next slide, please. So a word on COVID. I mean, Jens has said a lot, but actually there isn't any data on the vaccinations of migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. Or there may be data, but it's not public. And what we do know from the work done by the NGOs in the reception centres, that refugees and asylum seekers are thought to be spreaders of COVID. They're demonized. There's been 168 countries which have fully or partially closed their borders. 90 make no exception for those seeking asylum. The containment in reception centres because of COVID has led to increased psychological trauma, suicide, gender-based violence. Many child refugees are stranded, many girls who may never return to school. They don't have safeguards, including health and vulnerability assessments and proper water supply and sanitation. And this leads overall to absolute and undoubted violations of human rights and lack of compliance with EU and global obligations. And this quote here at the bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but it was made by the director of the EU Human Rights Agency, who said recently, the EU hotspot Moria camp in Lesbos is the single most worrying fundamental human rights issue that we are confronting anywhere in the European Union. So we do wonder why we can't solve this, because it's overcrowded, it's 3,000 when it should be 350, but 3,000 people, it should be possible to have a compassionate and human rights-based program of work with them. So I've nearly finished. Next slide, please. So the conclusions of this report is that actually refugees are the most left behind, and they should be the focus of the 2030 agenda and its promise to leave no one behind. It's also, we conclude, that migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees already do and can, if they're given opportunities, contribute. If they are given rights to education, social protection, health, and housing, amongst others. But a third conclusion is that despite the framework of the international obligations of EU law, there are serious, systematic, well-founded, and documented reports of systematic human rights violations in EU countries of refugees and asylum seekers. A fourth conclusion is that some member states are both in breach of their obligations under international law and are blatantly failing to live up to their SDG pledges. The EU Pact on Asylum and Migration, therefore, is not fit for purpose, as it focuses on deterrence, relocation, and expulsion of what is called irregular migrants, rather than proper screening and support. And the final conclusion here is that racist, xenophobic, and hostile attitudes to refugees and asylum seekers prevail amongst, and they are used amongst populist politicians and their supporters. So we have a few recommendations to think about, which I'll share if I can ask Rose to put them on the screen. Oh, where are the recommendations? the recommendations, here they are. The recommendations are that we think it would be really important for a EU-wide education and information campaign on the positive benefits and contribution of migrants. And we also want to draw attention to the existence of the human rights protection and the EU external migration policy of the EU Parliament of May 21, and it has a call in it for a migration policy that reflects the human rights of migrants enshrined in international, regional and national laws. In terms of the reception centres, they should be designed and operated as open facilities. This is a call of a number of NGOs which is out there and in the hands of EU policymakers. We think there should be safeguards on borders and in centres to ensure fair asylum screening with necessary resourcing, and that there should be independent monitoring and oversight of these centres by EU and UN bodies to ensure the human rights, asylum and refugee obligations are met, and that ODA is not diverted to the border operations, but used properly to leave no one behind. And I'll just leave you with this thought by EU President Ursula von der Leyen. Migration has always been a fact in Europe, and it will always be. Throughout centuries, it has defined our societies, enriched our cultures, and shaped many of our lives. And this will always be the case. So with that, I'll finish. I think my last slide is "The choice is ours." We as European citizens have the obligation and the duty to hold our politicians to account for the obligations they have and should discharge for us. And that must include refugees and asylum seekers and the human rights of migrants. Thank you very much. That is what I want to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Sylvia, for that presentation. And I think our next speaker is Syed Hasnain from Afghanistan, who is really going to speak towards the solution for these problems that you describe. Syed is with us today to talk about his own journey as a former refugee from Afghanistan to where he is now, living in Italy, where he formed with 6 other refugees UNIRA, which is the National Union of Refugees and Exiles in Italy, and of which he's now the president. He's also the co-founder of EU COMAR, which is the European Coalition of Migrants and Refugees. He's the project officer for Children in Migration, the co-founder of ARENA, Afghan Refugees Expert Network in Europe. And as president of UNIRA, Syed is a member of the expert group on the views of migrants in the field of migration, asylum and integration at the EU Commission. The mission of this group is to provide advice and expertise on policies in the field of migration, asylum and integration of migrants. And Syed's point is actively involving migrants, including asylum applicants and refugees, in the design and the implementation of policies in this field is essential to make the policies more effective and better tailored to the needs on the ground. And this is a leading example of inclusive policy making that ensures no one is left behind. So Syed, we're honored to have you here with us today. Welcome, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sarah, and hi everyone. So I am Syed. I'm originally from Afghanistan. I'm really honored to be here today, and maybe my voices and my message somehow reflect the voices of many other refugees and asylum seekers, especially Afghan people that are under the terror regime of Taliban. So I left my country when I was 10 in 1999. At that time, there was the first regime of Taliban. They wanted to force me to come back to fight for Taliban. My mother helped me and supported me to leave Afghanistan. I feel myself lucky because my mother was my supporter to leave the country. But today, when I think about other children in Afghanistan, other people, about other youths in Afghanistan, so what will happen to them about their future? Because this regime, I think we should somehow change and we should not be eluded by this maybe view or opinion that Taliban is changed. They are not changed because I am one of the victims that escaped from Taliban. I know them. I have been in a place, I have been in a region where the majority of people, they support Taliban. They are Taliban. So for me, as my view, as my opinion, Taliban will never change because they instrumentalize the religion against other human beings, against other Afghans. You know that in these days, they said that they will have a more inclusive government in Kabul, the Taliban said. But what we saw, all the leaders that they have now are very important ministries, and they are the head of the government of Taliban. They are all the former, they are the same leaders of Taliban of 90s. So for this reason, and especially they said that they will include other minorities, Hazaras, Uzbeks, Tajiks, but they didn't. And I would like also somehow to speak about my journey, because it is not so easy to arrive in Europe. And many refugees, they don't want to arrive in Western countries in Europe. I have been for 4 years waiting to somehow that the situation would have been changed and I would go back to Afghanistan. But unfortunately, the situation was so hard even in Pakistan. Then I left Pakistan and I went in Iran, where I have been for 3 years and a half. And I have been victim of labor exploitation, and I have been jailed by Iranian police and sent back with force to Afghan border. And then I decided to continue my journey, this time for Turkey, where I arrived there, and by boat I arrived in Greece with a very hard and extreme situation with other 150 asylum seekers and refugees from different countries. I have been when I arrived in Greece, I was thinking that finally I'm lucky that I arrived in Europe. But unfortunately, I'm speaking about 2006. At that time, even the situation was not so easy in Greece. They didn't even give me the opportunity to ask asylum in Greece. So I have been also, as Iran in Greece, victim of labor exploitation in agriculture sector. When I collected some money, I said that I don't want to stay here. And I continued my journey under the truck in a very extreme, dangerous journey. And I arrived in Italy. When I arrived in Italy, I asked asylum. And especially in Italy, I had a very positive and a very wonderful experience, because I have been welcomed by owner of a pizza shop, an Italian guy, that I was in extreme condition. I was sleeping on the street. He said he took me in his pizza shop. He gave me some food and he gave me hospitality for one night. And that kind act of Carmine Calabrese, his name is Carmine, changed my mind and my intention to not continue my journey to arrive in UK, but to stay in Italy. So it means that a single act, a kind act of a human being, can change the life of other human being. So here today we are now 24 people. Every one of us can do anything. So regarding the situation, the current situation in Afghanistan, I would like to say that I have been 8 years in journey. So I don't want to wish the same journey for other asylum seekers, for other refugees, other people that they are now fleeing the country in Afghanistan. So for this reason, unfortunately, the situation is even worse than when I left my country, because when now the Taliban arrived, neighboring countries, they do not open their borders. I'm in contact with people, they have even Pakistani visa on their Afghan passport, that they want to flee because they are in danger. They cannot enter Pakistan. They cannot enter Iran. They cannot enter other neighboring countries. So for this reason, as a citizens here in Europe, I think we need to put pressure on our governments and especially on European institutions that they should open their borders for the people that they are fleeing for the future of themselves and for the future of their family members and their children. How they can stay under such a terror group that they say one thing but they do other thing. They completely do opposite. And the second thing, I think there should be some responsibility sharing with neighboring countries, that the people that they arrive in these countries should have the opportunity to be resettled, to be relocated in a legal way. There should be a humanitarian visa to people fleeing Afghanistan from neighboring countries. They should not be left there. We know that many people that they were skilled people, they have expertise, they have experience. I'm in contact with some doctors that they have experience. They were working in hospitals, but today they arrived in other countries and they do not have any future. So for this reason, there should be the opportunity for people not to do, because if we want to restrict the borders, then what happened? There are smugglers. Even if we see Iran has closed its border and then Turkey has closed its border. Greece, recently we knew that even Greece has closed the borders. What is happening on between Belarus and Poland border? Refugees, they are dying to reach out to Europe. This is the Europe that has the value, that has the international charter for human rights, that speak about fundamental human rights. So people, they are fleeing, and especially if we speak about Afghanistan, international community, included European states, they have a huge responsibility on ethical level because they have been involved in Afghanistan directly. So what happened in Afghanistan, that the people from one moment to other moment, they didn't have the opportunity to escape from Afghanistan, and they went under the Taliban regime. I think for this reason, people left behind. There should be urgent action for their protection. Every single state should open. I mean, also, for example, with some friends, I'm trying to take appointment for some people fleeing Afghanistan to have an appointment in EU member states embassies, but they do not have. They are not replying. The people that they have been somehow involved with international communities when they were in Afghanistan. So this is, I think, also the most important point and recommendation as a former refugee, as an Afghan refugee, to somehow give the opportunity to people. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, for this reason, that as an Afghan refugee, the people should be given the possibility to leave, and also the safe passage to arrive in Europe. And regarding the European context, I think there are some member states that they are already panicked about the situation of Afghan refugees, that many of them, they will try to arrive in Europe. I think this negative narrative should be changed. And how we can fight this negative narrative? We can change it if we give the opportunity to refugees, to migrants, to be leaders, that they represent themselves in events like today's. If we have more voices of refugees, if we have more voices of asylum seekers and migrants, especially in public debates, in news, in newspapers, in mass media, the narrative will change, because the people, especially populist, extreme far-right parties, that they somehow instrumentalize migration against refugees, asylum seekers, they would not have opportunity to do it anymore, because they see that here are We have asylum seekers, refugees, that they were fleeing war, they were arriving here and they ask asylum, but they are now active member of our society. They are contributing to our society. So for this reason, we have created our network UNIRE for self-representation of refugees, especially in public debates, in public events, in mass media. And we are doing also capacity building for other refugees and asylum seekers, because in order, if we want to communicate in a more effective and efficient way to the public, we have to get the skills to communicate. And for that, we need capacity building and trainings. And we do this for refugees. And the second thing, in many cases, often the procedures and the policies, they are not efficient and working and functioning when they are implemented, because in 99% in policy discussions and policy making processes, the voices of minorities, asylum seekers, refugees is not included in those policies. I'm a refugee, I arrive I ask asylum, and I have been through the procedure, I have been in reception center. And if you don't include my voices in those policies and those in developing and designing those procedures, how you can expect that they could be efficient and effective? So for this happens on locally, this happens nationally, and this happens also on European level, unfortunately. And another most important thing that we do as UNIRE, that's also our main objective, that we should tell our stories. We should speak about ourselves. Self-narration of refugees and asylum seekers. So that is also a challenging work for us as a refugee, but we are trying our best. And for example, some good examples that is maybe a beginning, a good start, but not a big step is, for example, the creation of this expert group in European Commission, where we meet with other members. All members of this group is with migration background, and we give our views and opinions on many topics, for example, on migration, on integration, on action plans, and also asylum procedures, and etc. So I think that is a good start, and we took that example also in Italian context, and we spoke with the Interior Ministry, Labor Ministry, and Education Ministry that our voices should be included in this. If you provide services, if you provide information, and if you don't take in consideration our views, in that, it won't work. The people will not trust those informations. Those services will not work. So I don't want to take much time. I would like to really thank you for this opportunity. I think in order to have more inclusive and welcoming societies in Europe, we need to include more voices of refugees and asylum seekers and migrants. Also, we can be as an ally with other civil society organizations, to highlight. If we speak directly, it has more effect, it has more impact directly, because we have been suffering, I speak as a refugee, so we are forced to leave our country. We have been in majority of cases forced to entrust your life to smugglers, with many sufferings, to arrive in Europe, and have been in asylum procedure and reception centers. So I think this should be somehow valued in host societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Syed, for that very moving presentation, and thank you for taking part in this event. And we look forward very much to collaborating with you in the future to hear more about your amazing work, and really for changing the narrative in this particular field, which is, it needs lots of voices like yours at the table. So we're delighted to have you here. I would like to now introduce our next speaker, MEP Grace O'Sullivan. Grace is a Green Party member, MEP for the Ireland South constituency, an environmental education specialist, and a mother, and a peace and environmental justice activist, an ecologist, and a former surf champion of Ireland. She spent 20 years working with Greenpeace and 10 of those years at sea, sometimes as a crew member of the Rainbow Warrior. And in the European Parliament, her particular area of focus are as a member of the PESH, the Fisheries Committee, and ENVI, the Committee on Environment, Public Health and Food Safety. She's a member of the delegations on Mercosur and Palestine, and a member of a number of working groups, and most notably as co-chair of the Greens EFA Biodiversity Working Group. Grace was formerly an Irish senator, and she's also a member of the SDGs Alliance. Currently, Grace is in trilogue negotiations with the European Commission and Council as the Parliament's lead negotiator, the rapporteur on the 8th Environment Action Programme. Grace has also been championing the cause of hundreds of Afghan refugees that are seeking asylum in Ireland currently. Grace, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. It's wonderful to have you here. Very welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. And I just want to really thank the previous speakers, Jens, Sylvia and Syed. And I agree with what you said, Sarah. Syed, your presentation and your story is really important that you are heard. And it's, as you said, a single act of kindness helped to get you on your way. And I know it's a very troubling times in Afghanistan, and certainly we will do our best to support you. So I'm coming to you from my home in Tramore, County Waterford in Ireland. So greetings to you all from Ireland, and thank you to the SDG Europe for inviting me to speak here today as part of the European Assembly at the Global People's Assembly, all part of this very, very important global week of action for the SDGs and global call for action against poverty. And indeed, the whole principle of leave no one behind is very, very important. And so some of the words I mentioned just now, I just want to kind of speak to you of as I present today, and that is Europe. It's global, it's people, it's the SDGs. My own life's work in activism and political campaigning and around political action have been at the core of creating connections in all of these areas. So we live now in a time in history when the world has never been closer in one regard, when we think of technology, information, digital access, traveling, like we're so connected. And yet on the other hand, we could argue that these connections and conveniences, they serve to make the world a little smaller, to bring us closer. But do they serve the world to be more caring, more generous, more fair, and more sustainable? So we are, in a way, through these means, inextricably linked. And as an ecologist, you know, I always say that humans and life on the planet, other biodiversity, that we are co-inhabitants of this planet. We're interrelated and interconnected on this planet we call home. So we have shared goals and common ground, but as many of you know the saying, we're so close, but yet we're so far. I feel at the moment in the history of humanity, we're living on a wounded planet, and many of the life forms around us, including ourselves as a species, there's a lot of pain and suffering and a sense of woundedness, and it's not only psychological, but it's physical. And we are living in a world now more and more of extremes, where we see an exhaustingly skewed focus on making money, as Jens referred to earlier, you know, that gap, making money, the gaps between those who have and those who have not. And that seems to be growing wider, and it's hard. At the extreme end of the divide, we see the interconnectedness of humanity and nature, and just that wide chasm coming in between, where, as in effect, we need to be bringing things together. So as an MEP, I've been calling very much for that interconnectedness, and again, as my background as an ecologist and an activist. And as Sarah referred to, I worked with Greenpeace on board the Greenpeace vessels for 10 years, the ships sailing around, campaigning around the world. And that kind of opened my eyes. It helped me to bear witness to some of the different human and environmental atrocities that are happening around the world. So back in the 80s and 90s, I would have seen, you know, atmospheric pollution, biodiversity loss, and in fact, back in the 1980s, we already were talking about greenhouse gas emissions, global warming, and the impact that that the humanity was having on the planet. And we also were pushing, you know, for that planetary health, and trying to recognize that, in fact, the actual life support systems we need to survive on Earth, we were in effect damaging planetary health. And for that reason, you know, we've been calling for global action all the time. And I think one thing that always gives me some sense of hope, and any of you of my generation will remember when the hole in the ozone layer was discovered, and then we had global immediate action that whereby the harmful chemicals we were using that was damaging the ozone layer we stopped. There was a global campaign, an immediate campaign, and stopped the use of these different types of chemicals. And in fact, today we see that the ozone layer is knitting itself back together, it's healing. And that gives me a sense of resilience, that when we work collectively and immediately, that we can create the change. So from being in places like Antarctica and many years in the Mediterranean Sea, that kind of excess of consumption, excess of production, it does seem to be getting worse and worse. We seem to be reaching a tipping point. And I think for that reason, it's becoming more stark to more and more global citizens that the pathway ahead will not be good unless we take that sustained and global action. So as a politician now, a member of the European Parliament, much of my work is focused on the human health and the health of the environment. And that's critically important, that we legislate and we create the guidelines and we create the regulation and the legislation to try to change the course, the pathway of destruction into a pathway of positive construction. And climate change is the issue, I suppose, that's top on everyone's agenda. Also, you know, it's certainly an issue that young people are very motivated and active about, because they see the problems that climate change is causing around the world. And not only that, we know from many reports about the decline in biodiversity as effect of climate change. And we see the images of conflict and evident on our screens, and brutal disregard, as you spoke about, Syed, in terms of basic human rights. And we seem to be moving far away from equality, from equity, from ecological and economic and social balance, sustainability and fairness. And we need change that. So my focus in the Parliament is on the PET committees, which is the Fisheries Committee, which covers ocean health, and which is really important also, not only for other species health, but for our own human health. And also I work on that committee they call ENVI, which is Environment, Public Health and Food Safety. And I work on biodiversity groups as well. And I'm on a delegation for on Palestine and Mercosur and Latin America as well. So from that, you'll see politicians and members of the European Parliament, like it's not that we're sitting back and doing nothing. We are busy, and we are very, very aware of what's going on around us. So my work continuously, it's hard because we see the evidence before us, and we recognize, and in my case, recognize that we're pushing the planet right to the beyond planetary boundaries, and this is unsustainable. So there is that sense and that impetus, and that that we need to act, and we need to act fast. So in the ENVI committee, the Environment Committee, I'm working on the 8th Environment Action Programme. And I suppose I term this programme as the jam in the sandwich between the European Green Deal and the SDGs. So that's and I just expand on this a little bit. So the Environment Action Programme, it tackles the cost. One of the issues it tackles is the cost of environmental inaction. So that's the cost of environmental action is often quoted by policymakers as a reason for not taking steps to address the ecological emergency. So it costs too much. And that mindset that considers environmental and climate action just as a cost must change. So it should instead be seen, so working for on environmental action should be seen as an investment, with the reward being a healthy and stable planet. And the real cost when it comes to environmental policy is the cost of inaction, or that cost of doing nothing. So I'm working on trying to get the aims of the Environment Action Programme of the EU to be mainstreamed, the issue of cost of inaction mainstreamed in all EU policies going forward, and all decision making from the ground up and top down must respect and comply with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and work within the planetary boundaries. And you see behind me the goals, and you see also the planetary boundaries up on my wall. So in our day-to-day practice, this means obliging the European Commission to estimate and take into account the cost of inaction in all its impact assessments for all EU future legislation. And as I said, at the moment, to my mind, the way we're doing things is not fit for purpose, given that we're in an ecological crisis. And another key area of the Environment Action Programme focuses on our current economic model, and Jens spoke about this earlier, and how we need to look beyond it. And so the current global economic model uses GDP growth as the sole measure of progress. And GDP, to my mind, is essentially, and I put it crudely, it's all about production at any cost, which is causing a detrimental and damaging cost to the planet. And we need to move away from this. And the OECD says that GDP growth is tightly coupled with increased environmental degradation and does not even always decrease inequalities. So as the saying goes, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And we see, since, as Sylvia was saying, even in times of COVID, that divide is growing larger and larger. And adding to this is the global pressures of climate change and biodiversity decline. And it just reminds us of the sad and shameful fact that the geographical areas worst impacted by the ravages of climate change are inhabited mainly by people who already are at a social and economic disadvantage. So what we're promoting instead of GDP is a sustainable well-being economy, which puts the well-being of people and the planet at the core of everything we do, and at the heart of all decision making. So it's to implement a sustainable well-being economy. To do this, we need a set of indicators such as education, health, gender equality, social equity that go beyond GDP's unsustainable growth model. So that's my mission at the moment, to try and embed that into all EU policies. And practically that involves obliging the European Commission to develop a set of beyond GDP indicators to guide and inform the policies and direction. But in the Global Assembly, as ideas are formulated and collated and presented as a declaration, a call to action for governments and heads of state to act now on a fairer and more sustainable world, I respectively suggest that a global call for a rethink around how we measure success, a call for a move away from the outdated model of GDP and towards a sustainable well-being economy, that's included in any declaration that we make. And I also feel there has to be hope. And through shared global action, we can survive and develop a better way into the future. But concerted action is needed across all sectors, from ground up, top down, and to try to create the positive change we need, and to try to create that SDG aspiration and hope, and that spreads out into the world and creates the kind of living conditions we need to develop positively. And then we all, obviously need to contribute towards the global battle to tackle climate change, halt biodiversity loss, redress the imbalance in the distribution of the world's resources in a just, fair and sustainable way, and make the world better in terms of human rights. But so look, there's a lot to do. There's massive commitments we need to make globally. The SDGs bring us on that course. And just to conclude, to my mind, we do live on a beautiful planet. There is beauty around us, and there is hope, and there is love. And I value life, and I value health very, very much. And I hope we can do this together, and we take this all hands on deck approach, and that we work collectively to keep our home, and that home being planet Earth, in a steady, healthy state, and that we keep everybody on board, and we leave no one behind. And I recognize that we need impetus and we need power and strength to do that, but I hope we'll do it all together under the beautiful umbrella of the SDGs. Thank you.
Grace, thank you very much for that presentation. I think one of the key, most important things here is to, as Grace says in a very inspiring way, we need to take action. And what actions can we take? And certainly Syed's presentation, where he says it just took one human act of kindness to actually make a difference, and to see the difference that is being made because of that one human act of kindness. Now going into our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Julie Steendam. She's the coordinator of the European Citizens Initiative, No Profit on Pandemic. This campaign is supported by over 370 European civil society organizations and has the ambition to collect 1 million signatures to introduce a legislative proposal to the EU to make COVID-19 vaccines and treatments available worldwide at a lower cost. So Julie's here to tell us more about the campaign and how we can get involved. Julie, you're very, very welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, or maybe afternoon, evening. Thanks so much for all the previous speakers and for the opportunity to be here. I think let's maybe just all take a bit of a big breath because of all the things that we heard, the amazing testimonies, the stories, the terrible news that we heard, because we know, and we have been repeating this for years in every seminar, every gathering that we have with people's organization, that we face enormous challenges to get our social and ecological well-being of ourselves and our planet beyond on what is happening now. And the terrible thing is that, and this is obvious to state, that the pandemic has only worsened the situation, and inequalities have widened, poverty has widened, violence against women, against refugees, migrants has increased. So we face huge challenges, and sometimes, and I think especially during these isolated times, we really ask ourselves, now, what can we do about it? I'm just here sitting at my kitchen table all alone, like these amazing forces are weighing upon us. What can we do to change this? So I'm really delighted to get the opportunity to presentate our campaign, the No Profit on Pandemic European Citizens Initiative, to give you one tool that you as a European citizen or as a European organization can do to take action and actually change the course of history. So maybe just let's take a recap. And already in the beginning of today's presentation or this session, we already heard that, as Dr. Tedros, the director of the World Health Organization, said himself, the current course on how we are distributing a solution to end this pandemic, the COVID-19 vaccines, the equipment, the materials, treatments, is not going in the right direction. Quite the opposite. We are in front of a biggest moral failure of maybe the last century. And this is something quite big to say. So let's just make a recap, because our campaign is focusing on exactly this. How can we end this pandemic in the fastest, cheapest, and most socially just way? And let's just make a recap, because since the beginning of the pandemic, when all world leaders were aware that we would need a collective solution to get out of this, pharmaceutical companies have been receiving big amounts of public money. And let me make this very specific. Pfizer and Moderna, two pharmaceutical companies, have received over $8 billion of public money, taxpayers' money, to develop vaccines. And they did. They both developed two vaccines that successfully can help people to be protected and basically not to be afraid to infect one another or to die themselves of COVID-19. This is great. But what has happened since, after we did this big collective effort? We are now, let's say, from January this year, when the biggest vaccine campaign ever started, the pandemic has only worsened. So we have a solution now, but since the start of this year, close to 3 million people around the world have died of COVID-19. We are still at a peak. At an average, still 10,000 people per day are dying of COVID-19. So we're nowhere near the end of this terrible situation. Quite the opposite. We have been facing new lockdowns, more economical loss, mental worship for lots of us, social isolation, and biggest crisis coming up in decennia. And this is a terrible thing to think about, because we have the solution in our hands. We have the technologies, we have the know-how, which has been funded by our public collective money. We have the vaccines, we know how to protect people and end this pandemic, but we are not sharing this. 80% of all available vaccines doses have been allocated to rich countries. Only 1% of all the vaccines that have been produced so far have been given to low-income countries. Only 1%. Whilst mostly the people living in these countries are even more exposed to the dangers of getting infected, getting sick, and not being able to get treatment. So this is a moral failure, as Dr. Tedros has said. I think he used the words quite right. So it has been a year of big losses, but let's be clear, this has been a year of losses for everyone. Those same companies, Pfizer and Moderna, had their best year ever. They made billions of profits. The CEO of Pfizer and the one of Moderna became billionaires during this year. So they have clearly no incentive whatsoever to change the course of history. They get to choose how many vaccines they can produce, who gets them first, and at what price. In the last year, since they started vaccinating people, Pfizer has increased the price of their doses 3 times. The People's Vaccine Alliance has calculated that we are overpaying for this vaccine. The general expected production cost of one vaccine doses would be around $1. And on an average scale, we are paying about $15 or some countries even $30 per shot for this vaccine. So all of this money, where is it going to? The pockets of shareholders. This is nowhere near having a solution to end this pandemic. And now we have a big opportunity, or actually big responsibility as European citizens, to address this. Because the European Commission, despite all the promises that they make, the nice words that they use, hasn't done anything to oppose the situation. The European Commission has been allowing Pfizer and Moderna to increase their pricing, making sure that all of the public money that we are paying for these vaccines is not available to invest in our public healthcare system, in social housing, in mental well-being, and basically all of the challenges that we face. We are losing billions, millions of money just to pay for the profits of pharmaceutical companies. And this is not acceptable. But it is not the last thing. The European Commission is also hoarding vaccines. It has been said in the beginning, we have been hoarding more vaccines than we actually need. To give a very specific and worrisome example, the European Union has been importing 10 million vaccine shots from South Africa. That's right, the Johnson & Johnson factory in South Africa, a country that has been ravaged by the COVID-19 virus. Lots of people have died, lots of social and economical hardship, has been exporting vaccine shots to Europe. Actually, we have been importing or taking away more vaccines than we have been donating, as they like to call it, to South Africa. Just to give you an idea on how unstable or unbalanced the relations are nowadays. So this is what the European Commission has been doing. And to make it even worse, the European Commission is on the forefront of blocking other countries, for example, India, Bangladesh, Senegal, countries with important, well-functioning capacities to make vaccines. They have been blocking their opportunity to make the vaccine for themselves. They have been refusing putting pressure on pharmaceutical companies in developing countries to make the vaccines for themselves. They have been actively participating in more deaths, more hardship, more lockdowns in the rest of the world. And this is a terrible thing that is happening right now. So we have all the right as citizens, as civil society organizations, as people to be absolutely outraged on what is happening today. We made all the reports, we have all the research, but this is not affecting the European Commission whatsoever. What we need is a big amount of public pressure to change the course of history. So I'm happy to share with you one thing that we have been doing. Since November last year, a group of 11 European citizens have started the European Citizens Initiative No Profit on Pandemic. And this is a very powerful tool that we have. A European Citizens Initiative is a way to directly introduce a legislative proposal to the European Commission. The only thing that we need to do, and it's not a small one, is that we need to collect 1 million signatures of European citizens. We made a legislative proposal to make sure that all vaccines and treatments and equipments should be available worldwide at a low cost, production costs, that all contracts with pharmaceutical companies are transparent, that there are no trade secrets, and that all the technology, all the know-how that we have so far about the pandemic and how to make these vaccines are shared, that there's global cooperation, collaboration between vaccine producers to make sure that the vaccine is available at low cost as fast as possible and that we can start protecting people for sure. So what we are suggesting is a big amount of popular mobilization. And I think this is the biggest spirit that we have today, of course. The biggest spirit of this People's Assembly is to show we, the people, have a voice and we also have a power. We have people, we have big allies, as we heard today, in the European Parliament, but even their power isn't sufficient. The European Parliament, I'm so sorry, that was my timer. So this shows I have a few minutes left. Here we go. Okay. That was my timer. I'm switching
Julie,
it off now.
We are a little bit. Julie,
no, I'm
we're running
finishing
a
now.
little bit over time. So. Okay, great.
Yeah, I will
Thank
close
you.
down now. It was my timer running off, showing that I have to quit now. So what I really want to ask everyone, we are already the biggest coalition ever for a European Citizens Initiative. And we know that if we have that 1 million signatures, we will have a change in the European Commission and change their position. So what I'm asking everyone to do is go to the website, we'll put it in the chat, sign it for yourself, share it with your families and friends, but also, and this is really important, ask your organization to support us. We really need everyone, contacts, email addresses, staff, volunteers, everyone that you can reach out to sign this initiative, because 1 million signatures is a big deal to do. So I'm very happy to share this call to action with every one of you. I'll keep it here so we can have some more time for the next speaker and all of your amazing questions. Thanks.
Great, Julie. Thank you for that very inspiring presentation. And everybody go to the website there and let's all sign up and show people power for the initiative. I think this is a perfect platform for that. I just would like to, and as we're going to do a little change in our program, as we're running quite late on time, what I'd like to suggest is that we'd like to take your questions now. And if anybody's got questions, everybody's been very patient listening to these wonderful stories. And then if we have time after that, then we would be happy to present the video presentation from Barry Andrews, MEP Barry Andrews from the SDGs Alliance. So does anybody have any questions they would like to ask, put forward to any of the panelists here? And you're welcome to raise your hands or write in the chat. People are thinking about them.
I think Bruno has a question.
Okay, I can't see the chat, the hands. Bruno's question here. How many signatures have been gathered so far, Julie?
Important question. We're now at 216,000 Europe-wide. So we need to have like everyone asking for people to sign up, and we're at 1 million.
Okay, that's doable. I'll certainly put in for my 4 at least, if not 10.
That's a great challenge, thanks.
Yeah, maybe that's what we should do during the assembly actually, is get everybody to challenge and commit. Okay, I'll take that on. Okay, anybody else for questions? If you have questions, please fire them at us quickly, because otherwise we're going to move on. I want to make sure everybody's had time to, we've had some wonderful presentations today, and I really want to thank all of our speakers for taking the time to come and share with us. What a wealth of knowledge and expertise we've had in this room this morning. And you guys, we're going to get another 3 days of this, so stay on board for the ride. It's going to be amazing. So anybody with any further questions? If not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that we will play this video from Barry O'Sullivan, MEP Barry O'Sullivan, who's basically not able to be with us today, unfortunately, because he's he's traveling today. So he's going to speak with us. I'm sorry, Barry Andrews is going to speak with us about the SDGs Alliance, which is something that the SDG Watch Europe has really been trying to promote for a long time, in terms of MEPs taking on the mantle for SDGs. So if we could have that video, please, Grace, that would be fantastic.
3-day event organized by SDG Watch. I'm very sorry I can't be with you physically in person today. I'm speaking to you from Dublin in Ireland. In my capacity as the new chair of the SDG Alliance in the European Parliament. This is the latest of the global organizations and parliaments that have signed up to the Parliamentarians for the Global Goals. There's one here in the Irish Parliament, and now we have one established in the European Parliament. The idea of the SDG Alliance is to follow on from work that occurred in the last mandate, before 2019. In March 2019, an annual report on the implementation of the SDGs across the EU institutions was tabled before the European Parliament. After the elections of May 2019, unfortunately, the impetus and the initiative ran out of steam, unfortunately. So this year, 2021, we have relaunched the SDG Alliance. Now, what we're trying to achieve is to bring back an annual report on the implementation of the SDGs across the European institutions, and also to have a key debate in the European Parliament, which would be hosted by the Development Committee and the Environment Committees of the European Parliament. And we hope to have that in March of next year, which would feed into the timetable for 2022, coming into the high-level political forum and the General Assembly this time next year. What we're also trying to achieve is to ensure that after the next elections, the SDG Alliance is established as a formal inter-party group across the European Parliament. And what that will mean, very significantly, is that the SDG Alliance would attract funding and staff centrally from the European Parliament. For the moment, we are an informal cross-party group of MEPs with a shared interest in the SDGs. So we want to move into having a more formal footing. The third thing we want to do is to advocate for the SDGs. Certainly my experience is that in the last 2 years, and possibly before that, the SDGs have slid down the public policy agenda in Ireland and in many other countries. We had a briefing from Professor Jeffrey Sachs in July as we began the process of setting up the SDG Alliance, and he was able to confirm that Europe is way ahead of the United States in ensuring that the SDGs is on the public policy agenda, and yet here in Europe there is so much more to do. So we want to make sure that that advocacy work continues. We also, fourth point, we want to ensure that implementation of the SDGs is part of the European semester, and country-specific reporting is how that whole process is generated through member states of the European Union. So Ireland is currently looking at issues to do with childcare and housing, and other countries feed into the European semester according to various different public policy issues. So we want the SDGs and their implementation to be part of the European semester and country-specific reporting related to that. So we have made some great progress so far. We have the chairs of both the ENVI committee and the DEVA committee here in the European Parliament agreed to the idea of the key debate and an annual report on implementation of the SDGs. So we hope that the leaders of the different groups will agree to this proposal, and we will have further information on that in October and November.
So we've had to fade out our video at this moment because we are running out of time, and I just wanted to let you know that we will be having this video posted on our YouTube page, and so very apologies to Barry for having to cut this short. After all of these inspiring stories, we're coming to the end of our session now. And I just did want to take the time to thank each of our amazing speakers for their presentations, and to all of you for tuning in this morning. Please stay with us. for our next event, which is the African Assembly, and you'll find the link in the chat there. And I hope sincerely that we all stick together here and we make a real difference with this Global People's Assembly. We've got some amazing speakers. We've got some incredible groups. A lot of people have pulled together from 80 countries to be at this assembly. So let's make it the best one yet. So thank you very much, all of you, for your time and energy and inspiration.
Thank you. Congrats.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you
everyone.
so much.
Bye.
Congratulations.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.